This is Brent Allan Winters, commonlawyer.com, www.commonlawyer.com, and you can go to that website and learn more about In Church, INNCHURCH, affiliated with the law school, Winters Inn. This is the two elders, Dan Scadam, myself, Montana Dan, and we're talking to Dan Scadam, of course, is a former state legislator in Montana, and we're talking to Rick Jore, who has been fashioned the no-compromise legislator, probably never been one like him since he was in the state legislature. And then, of course, me, Dan and Montana Dan and Rick have both been in office, and I'm the guy that tried hard and spent $1 million to try to get into office, and instead of going to office, I got a better education, gentlemen. I got thrown in federal prison, indicted by a grand jury, and some of that kind of stuff, kind of like DJ Trump. I was saying I need to write a letter to DJ Trump and welcome him to the club of being indicted and convicted and all those kind of things. All the jury did.
You're so to speak blood brothers there, Brent.
Oh yeah, we're in a fraternity at this point. But these two fellows survived it. Now that tells me something about both of you. There has to be a certain amount of wisdom in surviving in politics and not going to jail while you're saying the truth. And Dan and I talked about this the other day, and Dan, you and I were talking about the difference between a politician and a statesman, and you brought up, and we both concluded a statesman, a man that doesn't compromise and has the truth, is a statesman. But then I made the point, well, some statesmen know the truth, but they lie a lot, and that's, of course, part of the culture of politics, and I'm not against a man not hiding some of the truth in politics, because politics is war. There's some things you can't say in politics. If you do, they'll either ruin your reputation. If that doesn't work, they'll indict you and try to send you to prison. If that doesn't work, they'll kill you. Now, that's been my observations of politics in my lifetime, and I think it's true, and more true now than it's been in the past even. But it's a total warfare kind of game, and there's a lot at stake, and more at stake all the time the bigger government gets, unfortunately. And we have a man in office. Now, here's what I want to ask you, Rick, and then I want Dan to weigh in like he did in the last clip, as often as he wants. What is your view, Mr. Jore? What is your view, after all your experiences, of DJ Trump? Is he good, bad, ugly, or in between, or what do you think?
Well, that's an interesting question for me, Brent, because, and I'm going to be, I'll have to admit that I've refrained in recent years from expressing that to a lot of friends of mine, because they are so supportive of Donald Trump. But I'm going to admit right off the bat that I've never voted for him. And I often use the write-in line on, actually I should say more than often, I almost exclusively use the write-in line on my ballot, because I call it reclaiming my ballot. I disagree that political parties should have the control over our ballots that they do. But anyway, obviously, I'll say it this way. I've told friends of mine that I like the John Wayne spirit part of Donald Trump. I like a leader that's bold and forceful. In that aspect, I appreciate Trump's efforts. I really do. On the other hand, in all honesty, I've never been able to develop a strong confidence in his understanding of constitutional principles. I think he signed bills that were very blatantly unconstitutional. The CARES Act during that whole COVID experience or time frame, I think exposed a lot about our country. And when the Congress passed that CARES Act and he signed it, I thought that was acquiescence to political expediency and pragmatism. I'll just say that I hope that he keeps going on this trend. I have to admit I'm somewhat encouraged by it. I just hope that it goes far enough that that it gets us back into the boundaries of the Constitution, or that's the goal.
Dan, when you went to the legislature, was there a time that you went through a learning curve about what was going on, and was it a culture shock?
Yeah, oh yeah, it is a culture shock. Unlike Rick, I was a 90-day jab at it. I only made it once. I ran a few times, but yeah, it's a huge culture shock, and I think a lot of people think, or I did, that I could go to Helena and make a big difference, but basically all you do is kill the really bad stuff, or work at killing the bad stuff.
For those of you that weren't listening closely, Dan did not say, I thought I could go to hell and make a big difference.
Oh, sorry about that.
I thought that's what I heard. I knew that's what it was. But the capital of
Some people think maybe it's the same thing.
Yeah. Capital of Montana is Helena. So it was a culture shock, you're saying, and the ugliness of it all. Is that what you're referring to?
It had good and bad. A lot of good people up there, or quite a few. So.
Well, Rick?
I didn't get to serve with Rick, but I wished I could have.
Yes, I'm going to ask Rick the same question. I want his answer, because I've known so many people go to the State House that I've known, and they were, I thought, good guys, and then after they'd been there a few years, they were doing things that I thought were outlandishly unlawful, and I couldn't understand what happened to them. Well, Rick, when you went to the State House the first time, was it a culture shock for you, and was there a learning curve and of what you could and couldn't do and had to do?
Yeah, there was a learning curve for sure, and I'm a slow learner because it took me 3 sessions to find out I didn't want my name associated with the Republican Party. And that's not, and like Dan said, that's not to say there's not some great individuals in the Republican Party, but and truly conservative by conviction. I seldom use the term conservative anymore because it's so relative, liberal, conservative. I actually have began to use the word statist, and by that I mean basically a worshiper of government. Either you're I think it's more descriptive anyway on somebody's philosophy. There's all kinds of Republicans up there that are statist in their philosophy, in my view, but they call themselves conservatives. But back to that learning curve, yeah, I'm like Dan. I thought, man, in fact, I said at one of our last campaign hearings before I was first elected, I said, there's talk that the Republican parties, because this was the 94, the Republican Revolution, remember, in Congress?
Yeah.
And that happened in the State House, and we had large majorities, 67-33 in the House, and I think 32-18 in the Senate, and a Republican governor. And I used the Republican at least by label, but anyway, my advice to the folks at my last, and to the speaker at the last campaign meeting we had, was take no prisoners, show no mercy if we get these kind of majorities. Well, they kept telling me and beat me down during that first session that, hey, you can't change this in a short time. It's like a big ship, a big airplane. You got to bank it and turn it real slow. Well, after 3 sessions, quite frankly, there was no effort to bank that ship, to turn around. It was actually, I would argue that we didn't even slow it down. I mean, perhaps, like Dan said, we killed the grossly bad bills, but the process of statism in the concept of government controlling every aspect of our lives and taking more and more of the fruit of our labor, I don't think we changed that, quite frankly. And
okay, that forces a question on me, and I want to ask both of you what your take on it is, having been to the State House. And I'll start with you, Rick, since you're warmed up. The three of us are not as young as we used to be, and three of us, if you live long enough, you take some lumps. You're in the fight, you're in the battle, you take incoming rounds, you throw a few, you get hurt, you get your feelings hurt, you get your business hurt, you get lawsuits filed against you, you get indicted for crime, whatever. Your reputation suffers. So you're a veteran of the battle. So you look at your life and you got less years ahead of you than you have behind you. And you still love your country. And so you want to do something that you want to make blows that count best you can. What, in your estimation, Rick, should you be giving your time to now that you're an elder statesman? That's what I'd call you and Dan both, because you've been in government and now you're out, but you're older. Where would you best put your time in your estimation now to make the most impact you could for the sake of your family that will come after you and your fellow Montanans and Americans? Where should you put your effort?
Wow, Brent, that is heavy, and I ponder that, and I've talked to friends of mine along those lines significantly. I'll do my best to kind of describe where I'm at on that. I have committed to fighting tyranny over mankind till the day I die. That's just me. And so I'm committed to work for the restoration of this country in that sense. And by that I mean restoring the principles of true self-government and individual liberty. At the same time, I'm going to say this, I realize that it doesn't look good. Restoration to a person that evaluates it honestly, in my view, has to conclude it doesn't look like it's going to happen and it's not going the right way. But that John Quincy Adams said, duty belongs to us, results belong to God. So we always have the opportunity, and I believe the duty, to fight, to oppose and speak out against oppression against our fellow men. On the other hand, I personally have tried to implement a strategy of survival. I don't know if that's the right word, of preparing for pretty significant chaos in the process of rebuilding the foundations, right?
Okay.
I'm always struck by Psalms 11. If the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? Well, in my view, that's a rhetorical question. And the obvious answer is we got to rebuild the foundations. And to me, that means establishing a biblical worldview among our citizens. I've always appreciated Edmund Burke. And it's fascinating to me that as a member of the English Parliament, he supported the American colonists in their grievances against King George. And he said, men are qualified for civil liberty in exact proportion to their willingness to place chains upon their moral appetites. The less there is within, the more their control there must be from without. And he said, it is written in the constitution of things that men of intemperate minds can never be free. Their passions forge their fetters. And to me, that addresses the principle of self-government exactly, because it recognizes the sin nature of man and that he will be a slave to his flesh if he is not regenerated internally. I've always viewed, or I shouldn't say always, but when I came to the realization of the actual practicalness of Christian self-government and biblical Christianity, I've concluded that it's an internal to external concept. Without the internal liberty of our regeneration through the cross, we can't overcome the fall, the sin nature that makes us slaves in another fashion. So that's how I view true biblical self-government and the concept of seeking to rebuild the foundations. And I'm going to just throw in here, I'm disappointed in I'm trying to think of how to say this, in the failure of the typical Christian church to disciple along those lines.
I appreciate that, and I'm glad you said all that. I didn't know where you'd go with it, but you got right down to the bottom, and you went straight to the foundation, which is personal, and it has to be a personal matter. I see that too. It's not a political solution ultimately. When you come to the foundations, it has to be a critical mass and God doesn't operate by majorities. One of my favorite sayings is the Noah principle, that when Noah went into the ark, he was in the minority, but when he came out, he was in the majority. And if we will find shelter and safety in the ark being a type of the Savior himself, Jesus Christ, the New Testament tells us that, to teach us that he will hold us up above the judgment of the great deep. The ark is presented that way in the New Testament. Well, thanks a lot. Appreciate you saying that. And there's more that could be said, and I'm sure you could say more, but I want to ask Montana Dan. But before I do, I want to say this. Montana Dan is the moving force that if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be here. And I wouldn't be on the public platform like I am. And he used to bug me to get on the public platform. And then when it came time for me to be on the public platform, he'd call me to make sure I didn't forget I was supposed to be on. And then in church, he did that for years when we were on another platform. And then in church, he's been encouraging to that, and that we do that. And he's here with me, and we're trying to hold some things together. But Montana Dan, you also are trying to do what's right as a Christian man, as a man born of the Spirit, from above. What, in your estimation, is the best place for any of us in general where should we be putting our energy at this point and making our blows count?
Well, the thought comes to mind is I should just keep my mouth shut, and then you won't see how little I know.
Well, I've discovered now Montana Dan is not prone to being quick to talk, which is that's true. But I've noticed he says things that are worthwhile. But I still want you to weigh in if you've got anything to say, and I assume you do something.
Well, Rick hit on it very well. We are he didn't say it in these words, but we are in a spiritual battle. And like you said with Noah, he was in the super minority, and then he was the super majority after that. And we just have to get behind what God is doing. Because we're fallible man, I am. So we got to get all the credit to God, and it does seem really hopeless. But I believe what I've learned, God instituted 3 institutions: the the family, government, and the church, and he has a plan if we're smart enough and diligent enough to figure that out and then get behind that plan. And Brent, your books and stuff I've learned have helped me a lot along that way.
And by the way, they help me a lot too, just because I go back and review them, what I found out. And I sometimes forget. But
but we have to. I think the key part is, and I do agree with what Rick said, that the church is mostly fell way behind on their derelict of duty, I guess, kind of, which is sad.
Sad, but in the scheme of the grand history of the West, and the history of the West is Christianity. That's all it is. And if it wasn't for that, there wouldn't be any history of the West, but that's what it is. And in the grand scheme of it, as I put it together, this is normal. In other words, there's always a remnant. There's always the leftovers of God's people that are committed enough to keep it going. And God works through them like he worked through Noah, the minority. And Noah wasn't trying to save the race of Adam. He was trying to save his family, his immediate family. But in saving his immediate family, he salvaged and saved the race of Adam. And God will do that with each one of you. I believe that firmly from reading history and reading the Bible. And the history in the Bible, God will use you to do things you don't even understand. And if you're born from above, he is the only one that can make a straight lick with a crooked stick. And we're the crooked sticks. And as Rick pointed out, we're sinners. That's our problem. But God has overcome that. And he will use you, my friend. I tell people, they say, well, what do I do? They get all worked up. What do I do? I used to be on the radio in Terre Haute, and I thought about a lot of things to tell people. What do I do? Because they don't know what to do. None of us do unless we've got some input from God's law, God's Bible, God's will. And I tell people now, you just think of the next right thing to do and do that if you're worried. Just the next right thing to do. And God will show you increasingly more the right things to do, and he's not as concerned about what goes in the State House, the White House, or the courthouse as much as he is concerned about what goes on in your house, period. Your relationship with did somebody say something?
I said, well said.
Yeah.
I've never heard it said that way, but that is exactly right.
Well, and I won't take credit for it. My favorite quote is, he who never quotes is never quoted. And I'm quoting somebody, but I don't remember who. So I have to say that so people will quote me, but I think they would. But I want people to say that it's true. And I mean, the older I get, the more true and the more real it becomes to me that it's what goes on between me and my spouse, or between me and my mother and father, or between me and my brother. It depends on who's in your life and who's closest to you. What matters is that you deal with those relationships the way God says. And remember the last 5 of the 10 commandments: do not covet, lie, steal, commit adultery, or murder your neighbor. That's in reverse order. Covet, lie, steal, commit adultery, or murder your neighbor. That sums it up. Be careful and concentrate on those. Of course, you've got the first 5 too, and they're just as important. Matter of fact, they're more important in some ways, especially the 5th commandment, honor thy father and mother. By the way, honor thy father and mother, in my study opinion, is the key to it all. And Paul the Apostle makes that point in the New Testament. We'll talk about that more later. It's time for me to say, well, thank you very much to both of you. Again, former state legislators, Rick Jore from Montana, Rick Jore from around the Flathead Valley area, and Dan Scadam from around north of Yellowstone, weighing in on what they think is important. And we've only scratched the surface. Maybe we can do more later. We appreciate you both taking time to weigh in, and we hope to get these up on the internet so folk can listen to them. This is Brent Allan Winters, commonlawyer.com, www.commonlawyer.com.